Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am doing very well, and good to have you here and help me solve all the problems of the world.
Exactly. Easy.
Good, and it looks like things haven't gotten worse over the weekend, but there's something interesting happened, in the last few days, and it has to do with North Korea, and we're trying always to figure out Trump's position on North Korea, and it seems at one time there was a time he wasn't very happy with North Korea when he became president. Now it looks like he wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize dealing with North Korea, which must aggravate Bolton and Pompeo and some others. I think that is real, but then it still doesn't answer, well, if there's a real conflict, why are they there? Yeah. But anyway, I don't want to talk about that so much, but I want to talk about sanctions, the principles of sanctions. And, I was just thinking, how long we had sanctions on North Korea? 1950. And Trump now had an announcement about sanctions because it looks like the staff or the automatic imposition of sanctions. Yes, we're putting on sanctions. They were announced, and then Trump comes and says, no, I'm overruling this. We're not going to put on sanctions. So that's pretty good, and maybe this is a new trend. But he certainly has been in favor of sanctions. He's not opposed to sanctions on principle, but in this case, he came out against putting more sanctions. He says it just hurts the civilians. Yeah. It doesn't do any good. So he had to write answers for why they don't need to put on more sanctions. So I think it's interesting to watch it. I think it's favorable. It's just too bad that we can't, if this is successful for him, which we hope it is, why he can't apply those same principles. Then maybe he'll fire a couple of people who always wants more and more sanctions. So we'll just hold our breath a little bit and see what happens.
That'd be a good idea. Fire a few people. And this is, your column just came out this morning where you talk about a lot of this, and probably another example of Trump being right, but not really understanding why he's right. The people have suffered enough. But, with North Korea, the sanctions kicking in, you talk about Bolton and Pompeo and the rest of them resisting it. There was news last week that the reason that the summit blew up, the Hanoi summit blew up, is that Bolton was whispering in Trump's ear, tell them they have to give us all of their nukes. And that's exactly, remember, that's what we did with Libya. We told Gaddafi, hey, give us all your nukes and we'll ease up.
Cut.
Yeah, they gave us all the nukes and we went in there and he got killed. But the sanctions, you're right. He said, I don't think he realized what he was saying when he said it. They've suffered enough. We don't need any more sanctions.
We're in a position now where we just read daily. We can't even keep up. There's hundreds of different, matter of fact, it could be many, many hundreds because, you have countries, but you have corporations, you have banks, all different kinds of entities can have sanctions placed on them. So it's really very hard to keep up with it. And it's more now than ever before because we're more in the driver's seat than ever before. We're more in charge of the empire. It's a little bit precarious, but we're still in charge of the empire. So we do use the sanctions and also the financial controls and all the things that we do. But I was just thinking about when all this started. There's probably been a little bit of this throughout our whole history, because we've been involved in other countries' business from early on. But it really got going in the Progressive Era under Woodrow Wilson with Trading with the Enemies Act. And we've talked about this a lot, why that was one big unnecessary war that more or less led to the disaster of the World War II. Yeah. But anyway, the war was declared, and they used this as an excuse to pass this law that says if we declare war and we're at war someplace, the president has authority to cut off trading. And I think that's reasonable. If you have a war of defense and there's a declared war, you shouldn't be trading with them, which would be very, very rare that would happen. But what I've found interesting is that they've used that. They haven't gotten rid of it. They've made it worse. That's what they have. So I was always fascinated with the Trading with the Enemies Act because Roosevelt used it. That shouldn't be a surprise, you know. He was sort of a big government guy, and but he used it to change it so that it would apply domestically, and it was applied to the executive order he issued to confiscate gold.
Oh, really?
And that way, under the Trading with the Enemies Act, which meant that symbolically this may have significance. That's probably when the American people became the enemy. You know, that's I used to talk about this. You know, after the Iraq War, we had to deal with the enemy, and of course the sanctions and all the problems and the and all these people came down. It was the American people who suffered the most by loss of a lot of freedom. So anyway, he used Trading with the Enemies Act to take the gold away from the American people and open up the door that all you had to do is have an executive order. So the president comes along, he issues these executive orders. I just wonder whether that has anything to do with the expansion of the imperial presidency.
It seems to be an amazing tool. And you know, we were talking about sanctions before the show, and I was doing some research. I wanted to have a list of everything we sanction. And it's not that easy because there are so many different curlicues, different ways it's done, different executive orders, different pieces of legislation, and there's just no way of doing it. So I went to the Department of Treasury site, OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets Control, and actually if we have the screen and switch over to here, here's a quick little handy resource of the active sanctions programs. And you scroll down and see Belarus, Cuba, Iran, Iraq, they're still on the list, Libya, Magnitsky, Somalia. You're going, it's okay, that doesn't look too bad. It's a lot of it. But then when you click in, you say click into here, and then you see a bunch of new stuff. Underneath that, it goes on and on and on, and then more and more and more. So underneath that is something more. And this is only one aspect. But then you went over, there's another way that they sanctions, and that's against individuals. Here's the Office of Foreign Assets Control, specifically designated individuals and blocked persons list. So these are people, companies, things that you better not do trade with or you're going to be in trouble. So I started scrolling down here, and I kept scrolling, and I kept scrolling, and I kept scrolling. It's almost 1,300 pages. So if you happen to get into business with someone, you better study this, Dr. Paul.
It's not funny, but it's really a bad joke, you know, when you look at this, and then they pretend that we're still running an honest, open democracy here. But you know, the whole thing is this thing can open up, and the Congress has authority. Matter of fact, they have authority over foreign commerce. I mean, the president's not supposed to be doing this at all. So what they do is they give the power, Trading with the Enemies Act, plus hundreds and hundreds of more. We turn it over. They can declare an emergency, and they do all this. So it's the Congress does this for 100 years, just wash their hand. So in a way, what we're talking about, Daniel, right now is this whole thing of what happened in the progressive era. You know, that's when it was started, and it's been built on. And if you add up all the death and destruction that we were involved in the 20th century, and we haven't done so well in the 21st century either. But it's just a consequence of that progressive era, and yet there's now who are clamoring, in the Congress saying the progressives aren't strong enough. What we need is, really total government control of the economy and the whole works. And so this is a philosophic issue, and this is a consequence of a bunch of bad ideas, and a consequence of the empire building, and the consequence of just totally ignoring the pretense of what was intended by the Constitution by having a small federal government, but now we have an imperial presidency, and you're almost not allowed to say anything because you can be accused of being unpatriotic if you're not for the wars and the imperial presidency. Somebody has to take care of this, and then they can fight over the details of when and to whom the sanctions should be placed on.
Yeah, that's a great image that you point out, how Congress washes its hands. And I remember when I was working for you on the Hill, the staffers of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the International Relations Committee as it was called back then, were all excited when a new sanctions bill was coming up. The ILSA, which they always talk about, the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act, was passed in 1996. And that, of course, sanctioned Iran and Libya. It came up for reauthorization periodically. And in fact, in 2016, they extended it for another 10 years. So on it goes. They took Libya off of the act because Gaddafi gave over his nukes, and then they had to go ahead and put it back on because they wanted to invade him anyway. But Congress passes these, and they'll put in a little thing, the president can waive aspects of the sanctions with a note. So basically, Congress's approach is sanction everything, call it a Freedom Act, the Iraqi Freedom Act, the Belarus Freedom Act, all these, but put sanctions on everything, and then just leave it up to the president. He can waive it if he wants.
And that's the right word, everything. It isn't that in time of war you place sanctions on a government and say, you just can't go in with that country and trade with it. You have sanctions and controls if we get annoyed on the banks, on the corporations, on individuals, and it goes on, different countries. And we put the sanctions on, and then the consequences are so disastrous that Congress doesn't even monitor. They don't know what's going on. I mean, even you, Daniel, you're so well versed, and you're shocked at what you found. I mean, it's terrible how monstrous this is, and yet, the president has probably endured more hate than any other president ever. He's the one that's in charge of this. But do they direct? Do the people who do not like some of the things that he does? Do they ever talk about the principle? Why does he have so much power? They don't want to give up the power. Yeah. They just get annoyed because of his personality. That's what it is. So they decided they're going to hate Trump. So they let that go. But they don't address this and say, why does anybody have this much power to control things? And of course, what is the consequence? It's always for our benefit. And my argument is, and you've made the same point, that they don't work. They backfire on us. We hurt more than anything. Just think the recent comments we've made about the consequence of the Iraq War, the death and destruction and the children that died, and driving the Iraqis into the arms of the Iranians, and on and on. But they never give up. They never have any grief over making a mistake. They've never made a mistake. It was something else that caused the problem. But they've never made a mistake. That is what I'm talking about. The interventionists, the people who play this game of sanctions, and now nobody would think anything about going on to war without a declaration. Reminds me, Daniel, and I think you'll remember this, is when we were debating the Iraq War. I brought up the subject. You guys, you people in this committee, you don't. If you want to go to war, declare the war. Yeah. So I introduced the amendment. It said to go to war, and I said, I'm not going to vote for this. But you guys went to war, so what are you going to do? Are you going to vote for it? And the chairman of the committee said, Well, Dr. Paul, we know you're an expert on the Constitution, but that part of the Constitution is anachronistic, and we don't even follow it anymore. I think that is really tells a story about what was wrong in Washington.
And remember that insane legalistic argument they gave you for it. It was all about how insurance doesn't work the right way in times of war and all this crazy convoluted thing. But the idea of sanctioning Americans, Americans can be put in trouble if you trade with countries that we're not at war with. We're not at war with Venezuela, no matter what people think about their government. We're not at war with Iran. We're not at war with Russia. But if you as an American want to spend your money and make an investment in one of these places, you could be in pretty deep trouble. You could end up in prison for a long time. And you talk about freedom, we're subservient really to our government's foreign policies. It's terrible.
Right, and there are precise goals that are out there. It's when you're running an empire, you assume this responsibility, but you have to build yourself up, believing that you are special and that you have a moral responsibility. At least that's their excuse. But it's about really empire. It's about money, power, and oil. Trade routes. The whole works, and that type of thing has been going on for a long time. But right now, I think it's coming. We're approaching a climactic end to this. I see this in a financial situation that we just don't go on, inflating the debt. They say there's no inflation, but just look at what's happening to the debt that's happening. But the other thing that is very much inflated is the feelings and hostilities and disapproval of America, the United States government. It's at a point where people are just itching, and there are a lot of plans being laid to compensate and do something because they're anticipating that we will come down because. You know, it's not viable. It's never been a system like this has ever been viable before, and there's a lot of planning going on. And the thing that scares me is that the foundation of our system, the worldwide system, as well as the dollar system and our form of government, all you have to do is look at what this has done. It's turned two groups of people into hating and despising each other. So it's very, very precarious, and this could turn nasty pretty quick. But going back to my original thing, they have to look at the principle of the intervention and the trading and turning over everything to the Imperial president. So if anything, you know who really is to blame? I believe it's the people. The people, because they were sloppy, they were naive, they trusted their politicians, they believed their politicians, they didn't know that you're supposed to be leery of government. The founders were always leery of government. Jefferson and others just warned about the size and scope of government. So they just left it alone. But then, if nothing else, even if the people are sloppy, what happens is you send sloppy people to Washington who endorses all this stuff, and to the point where it's going to be very hard to turn it. Matter of fact, I don't believe, and I've said it before, there's not going to be a switch turn and we'll come to our senses and we'll work our way out of it. It's theoretically possible, but it's very, very, very unlikely that that's going to happen. It'll end badly. So to me, the real question is what will replace it? And of course, that's what I want to participate in, and to make at least a suggestion, as you do so well, suggest that, in foreign policy area, there is another foreign policy, and it's compatible with the good part of America, and we should consider it. But right now, the competition between the different sides are building up when you think about what's going on in the U.S. Congress at the moment.
Absolutely. And you look at Iran, when we had that brief period after the deal with Obama, people were trading with Iran, things were opening up, they had a moderate president, the Germans were happy, they were making a bunch of money. It does work, and it works well. So,
I think, excuse me, but I think what you just said applies to Russia. I was an optimist in the early 90s, and we were trading and traveling, and people were going back and forth, and all of a sudden, boom, somebody said, oh, we don't want peace to break out. We can't make a lot of money off peace.
And they're making money and making jobs. That's the thing. So I would just close just as, things that we're looking at. I'm looking at the Ukraine election. It turns out that it's kind of a comedy in a way, in that a comedian looks like he may be elected. He got the most votes with 30%. A shock from the rear, Poroshenko, who has been trailing in third place all along, all of a sudden, just before the election, there was a shock poll showing him bursting through to second place. I don't know how that happened. I'm sure it was all on the up and up. But definitely something to watch. Here is another U.S. regime change operation that's gone bad, that's fizzled. Nothing good's happening there. So we're keeping an eye on that. Maybe we'll even tackle it later this week, Dr. Paul.
Yeah, a lot of people ask, you guys complain a lot and say you don't like this or that, but you never make a suggestion of what we should do. I think that's an incorrect criticism, because we're making suggestions all the time. It's just that a lot of people don't want to hear about our suggestion. But I don't think it's complex. I mean, the guideline, there's a lot of shortcomings in the Constitution, but it could be a guideline on what to do. But if you're thinking about principles, there's two things. Think about everything we do. Take the money issue, for instance. Think of it in moral terms. Is it morally sound to turn over the power of counterfeiting to a bunch of people in secret to run the welfare warfare state? Yeah, the moral principle is very, very important. But then if you want something even a little more simple than that, is just say that if you're expanding the power and the control of government over the people, or an attempt for our government to control other people, always go in the opposite direction. And this is where I think we're making progress, because more than half the people in this country are sick and tired of what our government tells us and what they do. They're confused on how to get out of it and where to go, but they do not fully trust the government. There were times when the government deserved a little more, credit, and now that they've gotten into so many problems. The American people now are very skeptical, and there's less trust of the government. I think that's healthy, but it is true. We have to talk about and describe what a society would be like and what the obligations are, because sometimes the obligation is what scares people. You mean I'd have to take care of myself? You mean I'd get to keep everything I earned if I did that? But I'd have to take care of myself. Who's going to run the safety net? Who's going to, all those arguments for big government. But anything that expands the power and scope of government it cannot be helpful to the cause of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.